comes over to this side of Rome and starts building churches all around Rome. Comes over this side of Rome and builds the first basilica over the spot where he thought Peter's bones were originally laid to rest. Now, who is St. Peter? Good morning, guys. Good morning. He's one of Jesus' apostles. He's known as the first emperor, the first pope, the first leader of this church. He was the one who came to Rome. He was evangelizing in the 60s AD here in Rome. There was one crazy emperor ruling at that time. You remember what? I'll give you a hint. There you go. They said it. Nero. He fiddled while Rome burned. He was over here in Rome persecuting the Christians. That was one of the things he was doing on this spot. Now this wasn't built. This was built in the 300s AD, but about 30s AD. This was built before that. This was built by Emperor Caligula, which is one of the crazy emperors in Rome. Okay, this was built in the 30s, used in the 60s AD by Emperor Nero. It's called Nero's Circus. And in fact, if this still existed today, it would overlap the left-hand side of this church. Okay? Now, a lot of the persecutions by Nero happened inside the stadium. They were crucified. A lot of times, and, of course, entertainment, games happen inside the stadium as well. A lot of times what he did was to light the stadium at night, crucify these Christians, pour tar on top of them, light them on fire. It was a way of lighting the stadium. It was quite unfortunate. And as well as St. Peter was also crucified in the stadium, and for that reason, they still do daily mass on the left-hand side of this church. Okay? Now, Peter was brought over to a prison in about the 60s AD, 67. He was brought over here and crucified in the stadium as well. But how was he crucified?
Upside down.
Upside down. Want to take a guess why he was crucified upside down?
So he couldn't be like Jesus?
There you go. He didn't feel like he was worthy enough the same way as Jesus. In fact, he said he was not a Roman citizen. The Roman citizens, if they were put to death, had a nice legal way, or a nice, I guess, if you're going to be put to death, they actually decapitated the Roman citizens. Peter was not, so he was crucified, but he was asked to be crucified upside down. He didn't feel like he was worthy enough to be crucified the same way as Jesus. So they granted him that wish, turn him upside down on the cross, which is important to remember because when they were doing excavations underneath this church in the early 1900s, they were looking for a man who was buried without his feet. Chances are, or the theory is, when they were cutting the bodies off the crosses, they were actually, a lot of them were buried without their feet. Or, excuse me, a lot of them were buried without body parts. Since he was turned upside down, chances are the theory is he was buried without his feet. Okay? About 300 years later, they built Constantine's Basilica. Okay? Before that, we've got the three criteria I was talking about: without his feet. 2, he was carbon dated back to the 60s AD, and 3, he had to be of large stature. Okay? What was he before we followed Jesus? A fisherman. Okay? 300 years later, we have Emperor Constantine building this basilica back behind me, or the one before that stayed here for about 1,200 years. After 1,200 years, goodness gracious. Hello. Yes, I know. Thank you. About 300 years later, we're talking about Emperor Constantine's Basilica, okay? About 300 years later, after he was buried... Okay. They're just checking my documents, guys. Quello, compentrice. No, sto parlando. I miei figli,